B2s and B3s. Or if you want to push and forward the whiskey in terms of wood, you'll add more B1s. So it's all about balance of what you're looking for. Yeah. So just have a taste of the pot whiskey. Cask strength, a lot spicier on the taste. Yeah, it's a lot spicier. I think you can see that at home. It's peppery. It's prickly on the tongue. It's really distinctive, and those pot still spices. But at the same time, it has a kind of a creaminess, and the unmalted barley which we use in the mash bill, that unmalted barley gives it that sort of creaminess and mouthfeel. It has a sort of a creamy texture, and it rolls around.
They're both lovely, but I mean, I'd say that is superb just to sit and sip on its own, even if cask strength is.
Absolutely, it's amazing, you know.
But it does seem so much spicier, and I'm wondering, is this particularly spicy? Well, you said it's a medium pot.
It's a medium pot style, yeah.
The contrast of going from the grain to the pot.
That's the contrast. I mean, they're completely. You have a different cereal mix. You've different distillation techniques. You've different time periods. Even though they're in the same cask, but you could get two completely different whiskies, and that's the reason I picked them. Yeah, it is fascinating. Yeah. So what we've looked at there is I just picked two components that I picked to go into Midleton Very Rare 21. And I suppose before we move on to sample number one, which is MVR 21, just to explain the process. So I became a master distiller back in June last year, and it was a wonderful occasion and a very proud moment for myself and my family. But I suppose the first task I had to do when I got the job was to actually sit down and start preparing for Midleton Very Rare 21. I'd say I was only in the office maybe 2 weeks, and we got cracking on MVR 21.
Beforehand, would you have previously worked closely with the likes of Brian?
Absolutely, yeah. Every year, previously Barry and then Brian for a number of years, we'd always bounce things off each other, and he'd always ask me to have a look at his MVR selection and bounce things off each other. So I was kind of used to the way it was put together, but now I suppose the onus was on me now, and it was a different responsibility, and so. Sat down last June and started putting together, I suppose, my prototypes for MVR 21. So it's quite a long process. So what we do in Midleton, just to explain, is that every number of weeks we have what we call a distillate review in Midleton, where we look back over the previous number of weeks, the distillate that we have produced in Midleton. So we look for trends. We look for, we analyse the quality. But sometimes certain batches stick out in terms of the flavour profile, be it pot whiskey or grain whiskey. So what we do then is that if we come up with something really special, we would set those aside, those casks, and we'd leave them in warehouse, typically warehouse A2, which is one of our old warehouses, and we'd reserve that stock. We put it aside, we put a hole in it so nobody can touch it, and that stock is reserved for Midleton Very Rare. Then that's the distillate side. Then on the mature whiskey side, every number of weeks, probably every 3 weeks, we also look at our mature whiskies, what's maturing in warehouse. And likewise, we come up with special casks or special parcels that really stand out. And again, we'd reserve those, we put them to one side, and they also go into warehouse A2. So what's in A2 warehouse then down there is that you have this incredible collection of the finest single grain whiskies and single pot whiskies that I get the privilege of sampling every year, and I can pick whichever cask I'm looking at. So that's the stock that's put away. And then what I did last June then was I sat down and said, okay, what style am I looking for? And now this was my first vintage, so there was a little bit of pressure on the first year. So what I wanted really from the start was I wanted to showcase, I suppose, the best of maturation and the best of distillation as well, because I worked in distillation a number of years ago. So I didn't want this fully maturation driven or wood driven. I wanted to combine both, and that was my objective from the start. So I wanted a multi-layered whiskey, well structured, but really combining distillation and maturation, and that was my objective. So over the number of weeks, what we do is we take samples of those whiskies, we bring them to the lab. I sit down, I taste them over a number of weeks, and eventually, after probably 2 or 3 months, I came up with maybe 5 or 6 prototypes of what I was looking for. I'd make some adjustments, and then I produced 2 prototypes eventually, and then I had to pick whichever one, and that was back in probably October, November. and hey presto, I selected my
I imagine it'd be
21.
quite challenging if you become attached to either of those, trying to make the decision.
No, one kind of stood out, and
Really?
I was very happy with it. And I remember I took it home one weekend, and Deirdre, my wife, and myself, we sat down and we just enjoyed the whiskey. And there was one that I was very happy with, and that was the one we went with. And
That's it, you go
so
with your gut, you know.
that was it. You just go, and it probably stood out. So this is actually the whiskey that I picked. It's the MVR 21. So this is sample number 1. So MVR 21. So this is 40%. Okay, so the previous two were cask strength. So this is a 40% bottle strength. As mentioned already, it's a blend of grain whiskey and pot whiskey combined together. What I did for MVR 21 is I brought the grain element up a little bit. I'm a big fan of grain whiskey, and I really wanted to showcase it this year as well. So I brought the grain component up a wee bit, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. The B1 element, which you asked about already, Joe, I brought that up slightly as well. And I didn't include any B3s or third fills. So it's only first fill and second fill that went into this. Age is from 15 years to 36 years. So that's the range of ages. So it's a very, very broad range of ages. And in fact, the oldest whiskey in here is 1984. So I included some traditional pot still from 1984, which actually was the first year. So really it was a nod to Barry and his first one as well. So I included a small amount of traditional pot still from 1984.
And surely, I suppose, as time passes and stock becomes older and older, Midleton Very Rare as a brand can only become more complex, or certainly could.
Yeah, but it's no age statement. So like next year, I could maybe bring the age down depending on what I'm looking for. It's not just about age. It's really when the whiskey is ready. And you see the previous two samples there. I didn't pick the oldest whiskey. No. I picked 94 in 2002, and that was to showcase that look, age isn't everything,
Yeah.
So this is MVR 21. So we just have a nose. So again, I brought up the grain element, and I think hopefully people at home can sort of see that floral note coming through initially. I call it rose water or rose petal, or maybe kind of summer flowers. That sort of rose petal is coming through. Then you move on to layers of kind of the toffee, the vanilla coming through from the grain whiskey.
Yeah, caramel.
A little bit of fudge. Probably had kind of roasted coffee as well.
I'm definitely getting the floral elements. I get that rose petal, maybe even like lavender, but there's notes of peach is what I'm calling it.
Peach, yeah. I suppose that's the next layer for me that comes through is the sort of the fruit, the peach, the kiwi, maybe a little bit of lime, lime coming through as well.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of that is coming from the combination of the pot and the grain whiskey just working so well together.
Hugely complex, I think.
It's very it's very layered. You keep going back to it, and that's what I was looking for right from the start. Mm-hmm. So we just have a taste. Sláinte, everybody.
Sláinte.
And I think it works really well at the 40%. Okay, people, if they wish, they can add a little drop of water. But for me, I think it just works perfectly at the 40. It's just right. The creaminess and texture is there. The spices are there from the pot still. Mm-hmm. But then you have the grain coming in with the vanilla, maybe the honey, the treacle, sort of honeycomb. It's really coming together. So
it's again,
finish.
Maybe it's just maybe I lean more towards the fruit. That's just more my palate. But I'm starting to get that lovely pear drop or kind of candied pineapple on the finish, or just some kind of boiled sweets in there anywhere.
So I'd like to hear what people think of it at home, and see. Just maybe send in your comments. And I suppose it's important to say that whilst I've shown you two components that goes into this, that's two of over 10 components that actually went into Midleton Very Rare 21. So there's about 10 parcels of different types of whiskies of different ages coming together to produce this whiskey.
We did have a question came in there just asking about the first two samples. Do we know roughly what the ABV is? I suppose?
It's about 56 to 57%, somewhere around that.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact percentage, we didn't work it out, but it's kind of late 50s. Yeah.
So guys, as Kevin says, please do put in any kind of thoughts, feedback. Let us know what you think of the Midleton Very Rare 21. I know I've certainly enjoyed it. It's not one that I've drank a huge amount of actually either.
Yeah, no, it's again, it was,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, let us know what you think out there. Be just delighted to hear your comments. So look, so that's 3 samples that we've looked at already. The 2 components and the MVR 21. So maybe we might just have a look at the Barry Crockett. Do you want to look at this one, Joe?
Yeah, we'll move on to Midleton Very Crockett Legacy. So this is one of my all-time favourites for a long time. This was the whiskey that if anyone said to me you can have any whiskey from Midleton, this would be kind of what I go for. So I suppose you can maybe give us a little bit of the background about who Barry Crockett was. You would have worked with him, and then I'll talk a little bit about the whiskey.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of working for Barry for a good number of years. I joined Midleton in 1998, and I joined as a distiller working for Barry. And I remember the first day I walked into the plant and met Barry, I was in awe of the man. Obviously, he's a huge character in terms of Irish whiskey. So I started working initially on brewing and fermentation and distillation alongside Barry for a number of years before I moved on to maturation. So it was a privilege for me, and he was very, very helpful and supportive and a very, very good mentor. And I'm still in touch with Barry. We talk every few weeks. So I was
speaking with Carol recently, and she said she would actually work quite closely with Barry because she's obviously dealing with a lot of documents and archives and signatures that Barry's the only one who can kind of make them out.
Yeah, like we Barry is there to support us and help us. Even there, we launched Silent Distillery Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and I would have spoken to Barry quite frequently because he was actually there when we produced the Silent Distillery back in the old distillery. So he's a fountain of knowledge, and it's a great support. So Barry then retired in 2013 when Brian Nation took over, and I suppose 2 things happened in 2011. When we sort of relaunched single pot still to the world. There was new packaging. We brought out Powers John's Lane, but we also brought out Barry Crockett Legacy as a tribute to Barry. And I suppose the second thing that happened around that time was that the old pot stillhouse in Midleton was named after Barry, so it's now called the Barry Crockett Stillhouse. So I suppose, look, it was testament to Barry. He was a wonderful person.
Absolute gentleman, yeah.
It's funny to think how much Irish whiskey that people drink is actually produced by Barry Crockett.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was also a huge fan of single pot still, and kept the flag flying for many, many years. So a lot is owed to Barry.
Well, it must be nice now to kind of see the fruits of his labour and to see this massive global resurgence and interest in single pot still, which is something he's obviously very passionate about.
Very, yeah. So that was I suppose that's the background to the bottle and the name, put his name on Barry Crockett Legacy. So I suppose as a whiskey, I suppose the Midleton family, which I mentioned already, is all American oak. So you could have first fills, second fills. I suppose the difference with the Barry Crockett Legacy is that we add in a nice slug of what we call virgin oak. So this would be oak that's unseasoned. We bring in the virgin oak from America. Kelvin Cooperage typically would supply us with the barrels. It's American oak, Quercus alba, unseasoned. We put our whiskey into it and then we mature it. And part of that goes into the makeup of Barry Crockett Legacy, which I think you'll see on the nose gives it that distinctive flavour as well.
So I don't know if we mentioned it, but we were just talking earlier how like Barry was such a big fan of American oak, and this really it does just tell a lot about American oak and the value we